I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the new HOA notice taped to my front door on that freezing January morning in Cleveland, Ohio. The paper fluttered against the dark wood as I fumbled with my grocery bags, and when I finally ripped it free to read, my blood pressure shot up faster than the wind chill could drop it. Effective immediately, all propane grills and propane tanks are strictly prohibited on all HOA property, including private patios, balconies, and yards. Violation of this policy will result in immediate fines starting at $500. I stood there on my front porch, the wind whipping snow into my face, staring at this ridiculous decree signed by none other than Patricia Henderson, the president of our Riverside Meadows HOA. My name is Oliver Quinn, and I had lived in this townhouse community for 6 years without a single problem until Patricia took over the board 18 months ago. Since then, it had been one absurd rule after another, but this one took the cake. My propane grill sat covered on my back patio, the same grill I had used year-round since moving in. I was not some reckless idiot who left tanks lying around or grilled inside my garage. I followed every safety protocol, stored everything properly, and never once caused any issues. But apparently, that did not matter to Patricia and her newly empowered HOA board. I dumped my groceries on the kitchen counter and immediately pulled out my phone to call my neighbor, Marcus Thompson. He answered on the third ring, and I could hear the frustration in his voice before I even said anything. "You got the notice too?" he asked. "Just read it." "This is insane, Marcus. It is January in Ohio. Some of us actually use our grills in winter. And propane is perfectly safe when handled correctly." "I already tried calling Patricia," Marcus said with a heavy sigh. "She would not listen. Said something about insurance liability and community safety standards. I told her we have been using these grills for years without incident, but she just kept citing some obscure clause in the HOA bylaws about hazardous materials." I paced around my kitchen, too angry to stand still. Propane is not a hazardous material in this context. People use it every single day. This is just another power trip. You are preaching to the choir, man. But what can we do? She has the board wrapped around her finger, and they will fine us into oblivion if we do not comply. That was the problem with HOAs like ours. Once someone like Patricia got control, they could make life miserable for everyone else. The board consisted of her 2 closest friends, Linda Morrison and Susan Clark, both of whom nodded along to whatever Patricia decreed. The rest of us homeowners had jobs and lives, and could not spend every evening attending board meetings to fight these battles. I hung up with Marcus and pulled out my HOA contract and bylaws, the thick packet I had signed when I bought the place. I spent the next 2 hours reading through every page, looking for anything that might support this propane ban. There was a general clause about hazardous materials, but it specifically referenced things like chemicals, explosives, and industrial substances. Propane grills were standard residential equipment used in millions of homes across America. This felt like a massive overreach. By the time I finished reading, I had made a decision. I was not taking my grill down without a fight. I would attend the next HOA meeting and challenge this policy directly. If Patricia wanted to ban propane, she would need to justify it with actual facts and data, not just her own paranoid whims. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7 in the community clubhouse. I marked it on my calendar and spent the intervening days preparing my arguments. I printed out safety statistics from the Propane Education and Research Council, fire department guidelines for safe propane use, and even called my insurance agent to confirm that properly maintained propane grills did not violate any homeowner insurance policies. Thursday arrived with another bitter cold snap. The temperature barely climbed above 15 degrees all day, and the forecast called for snow overnight. I bundled up in my heavy coat and walked the 3 blocks to the clubhouse, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The clubhouse was already packed when I arrived. Apparently, I was not the only homeowner upset about the propane ban. I recognized at least 20 neighbors scattered around the room, most looking equally frustrated. Marcus waved me over to a seat he had saved near the front. Patricia sat at the head table with Linda, and Susan flanking her on either side. She wore a burgundy blazer and had her graying blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun that somehow made her look even more severe than usual. She was 53 years old, worked from home doing something with medical billing, and had way too much time to obsess over HOA matters. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began, her voice sharp and commanding. "I know there has been some concern about our new safety policy regarding propane, but I want to assure everyone that this decision was made with the community's best interests in mind." I raised my hand immediately. "Patricia, can you explain what specific safety concern prompted this ban?" "Propane grills have been used in this community for over a decade without incident." She fixed me with a cold stare. "Mr. Quinn, I appreciate your question, but the board does not need to justify every safety decision to individual homeowners. We have a responsibility to protect this community, and propane poses unacceptable risks, especially during winter months when tanks can malfunction due to cold temperatures." "That is not true," I countered, standing up. "Propane is designed to work in cold weather. I have documentation here from multiple safety organizations that confirm proper propane use poses minimal risk. What I do not see is any actual incident or credible threat that would justify this ban." Several neighbors murmured in agreement. Patricia's face flushed red, and I could see her jaw tighten. "The decision has been made, Mr. Quinn. The policy is effective immediately, and anyone found in violation will be fined accordingly. Now, if we can move on to other business." "No, we cannot just move on," Marcus stood up beside me. "You are banning something that many of us rely on without any real justification. At minimum, you owe us a proper explanation and the opportunity to present alternative solutions." Linda leaned toward her microphone. "The board has already voted on this matter. It passed 3-0. According to our bylaws, the board has the authority to implement safety policies without a full community vote." "But that is exactly the problem," another neighbor, James Rivera, called out from the back. "You 3 vote together on everything Patricia proposes. There is no actual oversight or balance." The meeting devolved from there. Patricia tried to maintain control, but more and more homeowners stood up to voice their objections. Some were angry about the propane ban specifically, while others aired grievances about different policies Patricia had implemented over the past year. There was the ban on certain types of mailbox decorations, the restriction on parking any vehicle in your driveway overnight that was not registered to someone at your address, and the new rule requiring pre-approval for any exterior paint touch-ups, even if you were using the exact same color. After 30 minutes of increasingly heated debate, Patricia slammed her gavel down. "This meeting is adjourned. The propane policy stands. You all have 2 weeks to remove any propane tanks and grills from HOA property. After that, fines will be issued. Good night." She gathered her papers and stormed out with Linda and Susan scurrying behind her. The rest of us stood there, frustrated and unsure what to do next. "We could try to call for a special election," someone suggested. Replace the board with people who will actually listen to the community. That takes months, Marcus pointed out, and requires signatures from 40% of homeowners. By the time we organize that, we will all have been fined multiple times. I went home that night feeling defeated. I hated the idea of backing down to Patricia's unreasonable demands, but I also could not afford to rack up hundreds of dollars in fines. Reluctantly, over the weekend, I disconnected my propane tank and moved both it and my grill into my garage for storage. It felt wrong, like giving in to a bully, but sometimes you had to pick your battles. February arrived with even colder temperatures. The whole first week, the temperature never climbed above 10 degrees, and we got hit with 2 major snowstorms that dumped over a foot of snow each time. The HOA hired a plowing service that did the bare minimum, leaving huge piles of snow blocking sidewalks and making it nearly impossible to navigate the parking areas. I trudged to work each morning at the accounting firm where I managed a team of 5 people, spent my days buried in tax season preparation, and came home too exhausted to think much about HOA drama. Life moved on, and I tried to put the propane situation out of my mind. Then March came, bringing slightly warmer weather and the first hints that spring might eventually arrive. I was working from home on a Tuesday afternoon, catching up on some quarterly reports, when I noticed unusual activity outside. Through my home office window, I could see multiple vehicles pulling up to the clubhouse. Not just cars, but a catering truck, a rental truck, and several people carrying boxes and equipment inside. Curious, I texted Marcus. "Do you know what is going on at the clubhouse?" He responded a few minutes later. "No idea. Nothing on the HOA calendar about an event." I tried to focus back on my work, but I kept glancing out the window. More people arrived, including Patricia herself, directing traffic and pointing people where to go. Around 4 in the afternoon, I saw something that made me get up from my desk and walk to the window for a better look. 2 men were unloading large propane tanks from a truck. The same kind of propane tanks that had been banned from the community just 6 weeks earlier. They carried 4 tanks total into the clubhouse, along with what looked like outdoor patio heaters. I could not believe what I was seeing. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures, zooming in as much as possible to capture the tanks, the truck, and Patricia supervising the whole operation. Marcus called me 5 minutes later. "Are you seeing this, the propane tanks?" "Yeah, I am taking pictures right now." "This is unbelievable. She bans our grills, threatens us with fines, and then brings in propane for some kind of event at the clubhouse." "What event?" I pulled up the HOA website on my laptop, checking the calendar. There is nothing listed. No community meeting, no authorized gathering, nothing. "Hold on, my wife just texted me. She heard from Carol Peterson that Patricia is throwing some kind of party tonight. Private event, board members and their friends only." The anger I had felt back in January came roaring back, but this time it was mixed with something else. Opportunity. Patricia had handed me exactly what I needed to challenge her authority and expose her hypocrisy. "Marcus, I need you to document everything you can from your side of the complex. Take pictures, videos, timestamps, everything. I am going to do the same." "What are you planning?" "I am not sure yet, but this is our chance to show everyone exactly what kind of person is running our HOA." I spent the next hour photographing and videoing everything. The caterers arrived and set up tables inside the clubhouse. I could see through the windows that they were creating an elaborate spread. More guests started arriving around 6, all dressed up, carrying bottles of wine and gift bags. I recognized several of the guests as Patricia's friends from outside the community, along with Linda and Susan. Around 6:30, Someone opened the back doors of the clubhouse, and I got a perfect view inside. They had set up 3 large propane patio heaters on the back deck area, all of them running and glowing orange in the twilight. The same type of heaters that used the same type of propane tanks that were supposedly too dangerous for the rest of us to keep on our own private patios. I called Marcus again. I need to get closer. I want to document exactly what kind of tanks they are using and get clear evidence that these are HOA organized activities. Be careful. If Patricia sees you, she will lose it. I will stay out of sight. I bundled up and headed out, walking around the long way to approach the clubhouse from the rear. The sun had set, but the exterior lights illuminated the back deck clearly. I stayed in the shadows near the tree line that bordered the clubhouse property and used my phone to record video, narrating quietly. This is Tuesday, March 14th, approximately 7 p.m. The Riverside Meadows HOA is hosting a private party at the community clubhouse. As you can see, there are 3 propane patio heaters currently operating on the back deck, each using what appear to be standard 20-pound propane tanks. This is the same type of propane equipment that the HOA banned from all homeowner use effective January 15th, citing safety concerns. I moved slightly to get a better angle and nearly jumped when someone spoke behind me. Taking pictures for your scrapbook. I spun around to find James Rivera standing there, also bundled up against the cold. He held up his own phone with a grin. "Great minds think alike," he said. I saw the tanks being delivered earlier and figured I should document this farce. The more evidence we have, the better. Exactly what I was thinking. Are you recording video? Photos and video both. My brother is a lawyer. I already sent him some pictures and asked about our options. He says if the HOA is violating their own policies, especially safety policies, there could be grounds for legal action, or at minimum forcing a board recall. We stood there for another 10 minutes, gathering as much evidence as possible. The party inside was clearly in full swing. Through the windows, we could see Patricia holding court, laughing and socializing with her guests, while the propane heaters kept the back deck warm enough that some people were standing outside without coats. "This is enough," I finally said. "Let's go before someone spots us." James and I walked back together, comparing our footage and making plans. By the time I got home, I had a clear strategy forming in my mind. This was not just about the propane anymore. This was about accountability and making sure Patricia could not continue abusing her authority. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I contacted the fire marshal's office for our district. I explained that I was a concerned homeowner and had questions about propane use in residential community spaces. The woman I spoke with was helpful and explained the regulations. For residential use, propane grills and heaters are generally permitted as long as they meet safety standards and are properly maintained, she said. However, if your HOA has implemented stricter policies for private property, they would need to apply those same standards to common areas and HOA-operated spaces. You cannot have one rule for homeowners and a different rule for the association itself. What if the HOA banned propane on private property citing safety concerns, but then used propane equipment for their own events? There was a pause. That would be concerning from a legal standpoint and potentially hypocritical from a policy standpoint. If you believe there is an actual safety violation occurring, you can file a formal complaint and we will send an inspector. I thanked her for the information and hung up. I was not ready to file a formal complaint yet. First, I wanted to give Patricia a chance to respond and, more importantly, I wanted to make sure all the homeowners knew what had happened. I spent Wednesday evening writing a detailed email. I included the timeline of events, starting with the January propane ban and ending with the party on Tuesday night. I attached several photos showing the propane tanks being delivered and the patio heaters in operation. I kept the tone factual and let the evidence speak for itself. Then I sent the email to every homeowner in the complex whose contact information I could find. Our HOA had a directory, though it was somewhat outdated, and I also reached out to neighbors I knew personally to help spread the word. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started ringing within 20 minutes. Emails flooded my inbox. Everyone was outraged. Some people had questions. Others wanted to share their own stories of Patricia's hypocritical behavior, and several were ready to march to her house right then and demand answers. By Thursday morning, the situation had escalated beyond anything I had anticipated. Someone had created a private Facebook group for Riverside Meadows homeowners, and over 60 people had joined in less than 12 hours. The group was filled with angry posts, shared photos from the party, and demands for Patricia's resignation. Marcus called me early. Patricia is apparently furious. Linda called my wife last night, crying about how this is all a misunderstanding and we are taking things out of context. Susan posted something on her personal Facebook about harassment and bullying. They can spin it however they want, I said. The facts are clear. She banned something she claimed was dangerous, then used that exact same thing for her own party. That is not out of context. That is hypocrisy. The group is organizing a protest. They want to gather at the clubhouse on Saturday afternoon with signs and everything. I had not expected things to move this quickly, but I was not going to complain. If the community wanted to stand up to Patricia, I would support them completely. Friday brought a new development. I received an official letter from the HOA board, delivered via certified mail. It accused me of trespassing on clubhouse property, taking unauthorized photographs, and distributing defamatory materials about board members. The letter demanded I issue a public apology and pay a fine of $1,000 or face legal action. I read the letter 3 times, my anger growing with each pass. Not only was Patricia refusing to address the actual issue, she was now trying to intimidate me into silence. But she had made a critical mistake. By putting this in writing, she had created an official record of the board's response to legitimate homeowner concerns. I scanned the letter and forwarded it to James, Marcus, and several others who had been most vocal in the Facebook group. Then I called the lawyer James had mentioned, his brother David Rivera. David practiced civil law in Cleveland and agreed to meet with me that afternoon. I brought all my documentation: the original propane ban notice, photos and videos from the party, the threatening letter from the HOA, copies of the HOA bylaws, and a timeline of events. David reviewed everything carefully, taking notes on a legal pad. When he finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "This is pretty cut and dry," he said. "The HOA board has violated several principles of basic governance. They implemented a policy that they then failed to follow themselves, which demonstrates that the policy was either unnecessary or selectively enforced. Either scenario is problematic." The threatening letter makes it worse because it shows they are more interested in silencing criticism than addressing legitimate concerns. What are my options? You have several. First, you could file a complaint with the fire marshal's office if you believe there were actual safety violations. Second, you could organize a petition to recall the board members, though that process varies depending on your specific bylaws. Third, you could file a lawsuit against the HOA for harassment. selective enforcement, and violation of your rights as a homeowner. That last option is expensive and time-consuming, so I would only recommend it if the other approaches fail. What about the fine they are demanding? Ignore it. Based on what you have shown me, you did not trespass. The clubhouse area is common property, and you have every right to be there and observe HOA activities. As for defamation, truth is an absolute defense. You documented factual events and shared them with fellow homeowners. That is not defamatory. That is transparency. I left David's office feeling more confident. I had legal backing if I needed it, and I had a clear path forward. The community was already mobilizing, and Patricia's aggressive response had only made things worse for her. Saturday arrived with surprisingly nice weather. The temperature climbed into the low 40s, and the sun was shining for the first time in weeks. The protest was scheduled for 2 p.m., and I arrived at the clubhouse at 1:30 to find dozens of people already gathering. Someone had made signs. HOA hypocrisy must end. One set of rules for everyone. Fire Patricia Henderson. People stood in groups, talking and sharing stories. The energy was angry but also hopeful, like everyone realized we actually had a chance to make real change. Marcus found me in the crowd. Patricia is inside the clubhouse. She arrived about 20 minutes ago with Linda and Susan. I think they are planning some kind of counter-response. Let them try. At exactly 2 p.m., Patricia emerged from the clubhouse with Linda and Susan. She walked to the front steps and held up her hands for quiet. The crowd went silent, everyone waiting to hear what she would say. I understand there has been some confusion about recent HOA policies, Patricia began, her voice steady, but I could detect an edge of nervousness. I want to clarify that the decision to restrict propane on private property was made after consultation with our insurance carrier and was done to protect the community from liability. What about the propane you used for your party? Someone shouted from the crowd. Patricia's expression tightened. The event earlier this week was a private board meeting with catering. The equipment used was professionally managed and met all safety standards. That is a lie, another voice called out. That was a party, not a board meeting. And you did not notify the community or follow any of the HOA meeting procedures. I stepped forward. Patricia, I have documented evidence that the event on Tuesday was not an official board meeting. There was no public notice, no agenda posted, no minutes taken. You used HOA property for a private party, and you used the same propane equipment you banned the rest of us from using. How do you explain that? The crowd erupted in agreement, people shouting questions and accusations. Patricia tried to maintain her composure, but I could see her losing control of the situation. The board has full authority over clubhouse use, she said, her voice rising. We do not need to justify every decision to people who want to create drama and problems where none exist. You created this problem, James yelled. You banned something safe and standard, fined people for using it, and then violated your own policy. That is abuse of power. Linda stepped forward, looking like she might cry. Please, everyone, this is getting out of hand. Can we discuss this calmly? We tried to discuss it calmly, Marcus shouted. At the meeting in January, and Patricia shut us down. Now we are done being calm. I raised my voice to be heard over the crowd. Patricia, the homeowners of this community are demanding your resignation, along with Linda and Susan. We want a new board election and a complete review of all policies implemented in the past 18 months. The crowd cheered. Patricia's face went from red to pale. She looked at the dozens of angry neighbors, at the signs, at the phones recording everything, and something in her seemed to crack. Fine, she screamed. You want to run this place. You deal with the insurance companies and the contractors and the constant complaints. I have spent 18 months trying to improve this community, and this is the thanks I get. I resign, effective immediately." She turned and stormed back into the clubhouse. Linda and Susan stood there awkwardly for a moment before following her inside. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, but I felt uneasy. This had been easier than expected, and Patricia did not seem like the type to just give up without a fight. Over the next few days, things got complicated. Patricia submitted her official resignation to the HOA management company we used for administrative support, and Linda and Susan followed suit. This left the board completely empty, which created a governance crisis. According to the bylaws, the management company would need to organize a special election within 30 days to fill the positions. In the meantime, I continued gathering evidence about the Propane party. Something about the whole situation still bothered me, and I wanted to make sure I had a complete picture before moving on. On Tuesday afternoon, I was home reviewing my photos when I noticed something I had missed before. In one of the pictures showing the propane tanks being delivered, you could see the side of the truck clearly. It had a company name and phone number. I zoomed in and managed to make out the text, "Reliable Rentals and Equipment." Curious, I called the number. A woman answered cheerfully. "Yes, we delivered equipment to Riverside Meadows last week," she confirmed after I explained I was following up on an HOA event. "Propane heaters and tanks. The order was placed by a Patricia Henderson. Can you tell me how the order was paid for?" "I would need to check with my manager about releasing payment information. Can I ask why you need this?" I explained the situation generally, that there were questions about whether HOA funds had been properly used. She put me on hold, and after a few minutes, a man came on the line. "This is Tom Brennan. I am the owner. You are asking about the Riverside Meadows order?" "Yes, sir. I am a homeowner in the community, and we are trying to determine if HOA funds were used appropriately for a recent event." "Well, I can tell you the order was paid for with a credit card in the name of the Riverside Meadows HOA. The amount was $850 for the heater rentals, propane tanks, and delivery." "Is there a problem?" My stomach dropped. "No, sir. Thank you for the information." "That is very helpful." I hung up and immediately called Marcus. The party was paid for with HOA funds, $850 for the propane equipment alone, and that does not include the catering or anything else. "Are you serious? She used our money for her personal party." "We need to do a complete audit of HOA finances. If Patricia used association funds for unauthorized personal expenses, that is not just hypocrisy, that is embezzlement." This changed everything. I contacted David Rivera again and explained what I had discovered. He advised me to file a formal complaint with both the HOA management company and potentially with law enforcement if the misuse of funds was significant enough. Working with several other homeowners, we submitted a formal request to the management company for a complete accounting of all HOA expenditures over the past 18 months. The management company, clearly nervous about potential liability, agreed to conduct an internal audit and provide the results within 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks were tense. Patricia had gone completely silent, refusing to respond to phone calls or emails. Linda and Susan both claimed they had no knowledge of any financial improprieties and had just been following Patricia's lead. The special board election was scheduled for early April, and several homeowners had already announced their intention to run. I threw my own name in as a candidate. If we were going to fix this community, I wanted to be part of the solution. Marcus decided to run as well, along with 4 other homeowners I respected. The audit results arrived via email on a Thursday evening. I was having dinner when my phone buzzed with the notification. I opened the attachment and started reading, my appetite disappearing with each page. The propane party was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the past 18 months, Patricia had authorized over $15,000 in questionable expenditures. There were multiple charges to restaurants and catering companies listed as board meetings, but with no corresponding meeting minutes or community notifications. There were payments to a landscaping company owned by Patricia's son-in-law, significantly above market rate for the work performed. There were unexplained charges for administrative supplies and community improvements, with no documentation of what was actually purchased. The audit concluded that there was substantial evidence of financial mismanagement and recommended that the homeowners consider legal action to recover the misappropriated funds. I forwarded the audit to David Rivera and asked for his advice. He called me within the hour. "Oliver, this is serious. This goes way beyond an HOA dispute. If Patricia intentionally misused association funds for personal benefit, that is criminal fraud and embezzlement. You need to file a police report. Will they actually investigate something like this? $15,000 is not a trivial amount. And you have clear documentation. Yes, they will investigate." The next morning, Marcus and I went together to the Cleveland Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. We brought printed copies of the audit, supporting documentation, and a written statement outlining the timeline of events. The detective who took our report, a tired-looking man in his 50s named Detective Frank Morrison, listened carefully and took detailed notes. "HOA disputes can be tricky," he said, "but this looks pretty straightforward. If she was signing checks and making purchases with HOA funds for personal use, that is theft. We will open an investigation and reach out to the management company for their records as well." "How long does this kind of investigation typically take?" I asked. "Depends on how cooperative everyone is. Could be a few weeks, could be a few months. We will need to interview the board members, review bank statements, possibly bring in a forensic accountant. But I can tell you that $15,000 is enough that the prosecutor's office will definitely be interested if we find evidence of criminal activity." We left the police station feeling vindicated, but also somewhat shocked at how far this had escalated. What started as a frustration about propane grills had uncovered systematic financial fraud. The board election took place as scheduled in early April. Over 70% of homeowners participated, the highest turnout in the community's history. Marcus and I both won seats, along with 4 other candidates who ran on a platform of transparency and accountability. Our first official act was to formally authorize cooperation with the police investigation and to hire an independent attorney to pursue civil recovery of the stolen funds. Patricia, meanwhile, had seemingly disappeared. Her townhouse sat dark and empty, her car was gone, and neighbors reported not seeing her in weeks. This made the investigation more complicated, but Detective Morrison assured us they were working on locating her. In May, just as the weather finally turned warm and pleasant, I got a call from Detective Morrison. "We found her," he said. "She was staying with her sister in Columbus. We executed a warrant this morning and took her into custody. She is being charged with multiple counts of theft and fraud." The prosecutor is also looking at additional charges related to the falsification of HOA documents. What happens now? She will be arraigned, probably make bail, and then the case will work through the court system. Given the amount involved and the clear documentation, I expect she will try to negotiate a plea deal. But that is up to the prosecutor and ultimately the judge. The news spread through the community quickly. There was satisfaction, certainly, but also a sense of sadness. Patricia had been a neighbor, someone we had trusted to manage our community, and she had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. The legal process dragged on through the summer. Patricia did make bail but was ordered to stay away from Riverside Meadows. Her attorney attempted to argue that she had made accounting errors rather than intentional theft, but the evidence was too clear. The fraudulent expenses, the personal party charge to the HOA, the payments to her son-in-law's company, all of it painted a picture of deliberate misappropriation. In September, Patricia accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to felony theft and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of the $15,000 plus interest and legal fees, which came to nearly $22,000 total. Linda and Susan were not charged criminally, but they did face civil liability for failing to exercise proper oversight as board members. They both ended up settling with the HOA, each paying $5,000 toward the legal costs in exchange for the association dropping further claims against them. As for the propane ban, one of the new board's first acts was to rescind it completely. We implemented common-sense safety guidelines that applied equally to everyone, homeowners and HOA events alike, and made sure all policies were clearly documented and properly enforced. I stood on my back patio on a warm October evening, my propane grill fired up and sizzling with burgers for a small neighborhood gathering. Marcus was there with his family, James and his wife, and several other neighbors who had been part of the fight against Patricia's regime. We had invited David Rivera, too, as a thank you for his help throughout the ordeal. You know, when I got that notice back in January, I never imagined it would lead to criminal charges and prison time, I said, flipping burgers while everyone talked and laughed around me. Marcus raised his beer in a toast to Oliver, who refused to back down and ended up exposing a criminal. I was just mad about my grill, I protested, but I was grinning. The rest of it, I could not have done any of that alone. This was all of us working together. David took a sip of his drink and nodded thoughtfully. That is how it is supposed to work. HOAs are meant to serve the community, not the other way around. When people like Patricia abuse their power, it takes people like all of you to hold them accountable. Most people would have just taken their grills down and moved on. I almost did, I admitted. But then she threw that party with the propane heaters, and I realized she did not actually care about safety or rules. She just wanted control. That made me angry enough to fight back. James laughed. Best decision you ever made. This community is so much better now. The new board actually listens to people, we have reasonable policies, and our finances are being managed properly. It is like living in a completely different place. He was right. The months since the board election had brought noticeable improvements. We had renegotiated several vendor contracts and saved money while getting better service. We had updated the community playground equipment that had been falling apart. We had organized several successful community events that people actually wanted to attend. And most importantly, homeowners felt like they had a voice again. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Detective Morrison, who I had stayed in touch with throughout the case. Thought you would want to know, Patricia was processed into the correctional facility today. Official start of her sentence. Case closed. I showed the text to Marcus. He read it and shook his head. Part of me feels bad for her. 18 months in prison over HOA drama. It was not HOA drama, David interjected, his lawyer instincts kicking in. It was theft and fraud. She stole from all of you systematically over more than a year. The propane thing just exposed it. If Oliver had not pushed back, she might have continued for years and stolen far more. That was a sobering thought. How many other HOAs had board members who abused their positions? How much money was being quietly stolen or wasted because homeowners did not want to rock the boat or did not know how to fight back? We should document this whole experience, I said suddenly. Write up a guide for other homeowners dealing with corrupt HOA boards, how to recognize the warning signs, how to gather evidence, who to contact, what legal options exist. We learned so much through this process. It could help other people. The group agreed enthusiastically, and over the next few weeks, several of us worked together to create a comprehensive guide. We shared it on the community Facebook group, and it quickly spread to other HOA communities dealing with their own governance problems. I started getting emails and calls from homeowners across Ohio and even from other states, all dealing with similar issues. Some of the stories were heartbreaking. Elderly homeowners being fined thousands of dollars for minor violations. Veterans being harassed for displaying American flags. Families threatened with foreclosure over HOA dues that were improperly calculated. The common thread in all of them was board members who had forgotten they were supposed to serve the community, not rule over it. I helped where I could, sharing advice and connecting people with resources. David even took on a few cases pro bono for homeowners who could not afford legal representation. It felt good to turn our experience into something positive that could help others. By December, almost a full year after that first propane ban notice appeared on my door, life had settled into a comfortable routine. The new board was functioning well, the community was thriving, and my grill was getting plenty of use despite the cold weather returning. I was shoveling snow from my driveway one Saturday morning when a car pulled up. A woman I did not recognize rolled down her window. "Excuse me, are you Oliver Quinn?" "Yes, can I help you? My name is Rachel Foster. I live in Maple Grove Estates, a community about 20 miles from here. I read your guide about dealing with HOA corruption, and I was hoping I could talk to you. We are having similar problems with our board president, and I do not know what to do." I leaned on my shovel and smiled. "Of course. Come on inside where it is warm and tell me what is going on." As Rachel followed me into my house, I reflected on how much had changed in 1 year. I had gone from a frustrated homeowner just trying to grill dinner in peace to someone helping others fight against HOA abuse. Patricia was in prison, paying for her crimes. The Riverside Meadows community was stronger and better governed than ever before. And I had learned that sometimes standing up for something as simple as the right to use your propane grill could lead to exposing much larger problems and creating real positive change. The story could have ended there, but it did not. Over the following months, I stayed involved in HOA reform efforts, helping Rachel and dozens of other homeowners navigate disputes with their boards. Some cases were resolved through negotiation, others required legal action, and a few even led to criminal investigations like Patricia's. I never sought out this role as an HOA accountability advocate. It found me because I refused to accept an unreasonable rule and had the stubbornness to follow through when I discovered the hypocrisy behind it. That persistence uncovered fraud, led to criminal convictions, and ultimately helped not just my community but many others. Marcus joked that I should run for state legislature and push for HOA reform laws. I laughed it off, but privately I did start researching what legislative protections existed for homeowners and where the gaps were. Ohio had some laws governing HOAs, but they were weak and rarely enforced. Other states had stronger protections, requiring financial transparency, limiting fine amounts, and providing homeowners with clear appeal processes. In March of the following year, I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee considering new HOA oversight laws. I told them the full story: the propane ban, the hypocritical party, the discovery of financial fraud, and the criminal prosecution. I explained how easily Patricia had been able to abuse her authority and how many other homeowners faced similar problems with no clear recourse. The power imbalance in HOA governance is significant, I told the committee. Board members can implement rules, levy fines, and control community resources with minimal oversight. Most homeowners do not have the time, knowledge, or resources to fight back, even when the board is clearly in the wrong. We need stronger laws that require financial transparency, mandate regular audits, limit the fines that can be imposed, and provide homeowners with affordable appeal mechanisms. Several legislators asked thoughtful questions, and I could tell the testimony had an impact. The bill did not pass that session, but it gained momentum and sponsorship from additional legislators who committed to bringing it back with refinements. My involvement in HOA reform work brought unexpected media attention. Local news stations interviewed me about Patricia's case and the broader issues with HOA governance. A Cleveland newspaper wrote a feature story about the propane ban that uncovered fraud. The story got picked up by a few national outlets, and suddenly, I was getting calls from homeowners across the country. Through it all, I maintained my day job at the accounting firm and my seat on the Riverside Meadows board. The community continued to flourish under the new leadership. We kept the reasonable policies, eliminated the petty ones, and made sure homeowners always had a voice in decisions that affected them. The financial restitution from Patricia slowly came in as she made court-ordered payments, and we used that money to make improvements to the community that benefited everyone. On a sunny June afternoon, almost 18 months after Patricia's sentencing, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Patricia herself, postmarked from the correctional facility. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was brief and handwritten. Patricia apologized for her actions, explaining that she had gotten caught up in the power and control of being board president and had convinced herself that she deserved to benefit from the work she was doing for the community. She acknowledged that what she had done was wrong and thanked me, oddly enough, for exposing it before she had dug herself into an even deeper hole. "I will be released in 3 months," she wrote. "I do not expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I have had a lot of time to think about my actions and their consequences. You did the right thing by standing up to me. I hope the community is better now than it was under my leadership." I read the letter twice and then filed it away. I did not feel the need to respond, but I did feel a sense of closure. Patricia had committed crimes and was paying the price, but she was also apparently learning from the experience. That was more than I had expected. The following September, the Ohio legislature passed a modified version of the HOA reform bill I had testified about. It required annual financial audits for HOAs over a certain size, capped fine amounts, established an appeals process through the state attorney general's office, and mandated transparency in board meetings and decision-making. The governor signed it into law, and it would take effect the following January. I was invited to the signing ceremony at the State House in Columbus. Standing in the Capitol building, watching the governor sign legislation that would protect countless homeowners from the kind of abuse my community had experienced, I felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. This had started with a ridiculous propane ban and my stubborn refusal to accept it, and it had culminated in actual legal reform that would benefit thousands of people. After the ceremony, several of the legislators who had sponsored the bill came over to thank me. "Your testimony was crucial," Senator Williams told me. "It put a human face on these abstract governance issues and showed exactly why reform was necessary. We could not have done this without you." I returned to Cleveland that evening and immediately drove to Marcus's house to tell him about the bill signing. He and his wife hosted an impromptu celebration, inviting many of the neighbors who had been part of the original fight against Patricia. "Who would have thought that your anger over not being able to use your grill in winter would lead to state legislation?" Marcus said, raising a glass in another toast. "I was not angry about the grill specifically," I corrected him. "I was angry about the principle. About someone abusing their authority to impose arbitrary rules on people without justification. The grill was just the catalyst." "Still," James added, "if you had just taken your grill down and kept quiet, Patricia would probably still be board president, still stealing money, and still making everyone miserable. Or someone else would have eventually pushed back," I suggested. "Maybe it would have taken longer, but I do not think communities can sustain that level of dysfunction indefinitely. Eventually, people reach a breaking point." David, who had become a good friend throughout this process, disagreed. "You would be surprised how long abusive HOA boards can maintain power. Most people do not want to fight. They will complain privately, but actually organizing resistance and following through with legal action, that takes a special kind of stubborn determination." "Oliver, you had that determination, and it made all the difference." As the evening wound down and guests began leaving, I found myself alone on Marcus's back patio, looking out at the quiet neighborhood. Lights glowed in windows, families were settling in for the night, and everything felt peaceful and normal. This was what a community was supposed to be. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Another homeowner, this time from Pennsylvania, reaching out for advice about their HOA board. I read through their story quickly. It was familiar. Arbitrary rules, selective enforcement, board members who refused to listen to homeowners. I wrote back with some initial suggestions and promised to send them the comprehensive guide we had developed. Then I closed my phone and went back inside to rejoin my friends. The propane ban that Patricia implemented back in January seemed like a lifetime ago now, though it had only been about 2 years. That single unreasonable policy had set in motion a chain of events that exposed corruption, led to criminal convictions, changed my community for the better, helped dozens of other homeowners facing similar problems, and ultimately contributed to state legislative reform. I still used my propane grill regularly, especially during the winter months. Every time I fired it up, I thought about that first notice on my door and the decision I made not to simply comply. Standing up to Patricia had been risky. She could have made my life miserable with constant fines and harassment. The fight could have been long, expensive, and ultimately unsuccessful. But it was not, because I had facts on my side. I documented everything carefully, and I refused to back down when I knew I was right. The experience taught me several important lessons. First, that documentation is crucial. Without those photos and videos of Patricia's party, without the careful records of financial transactions, without the timeline of events clearly laid out, none of the legal action would have been possible. Second, that community matters. I could not have fought this battle alone. It took Marcus, James, David, and dozens of other homeowners working together to create the pressure necessary for change. Third, that persistence pays off. There were multiple times I could have given up, accepted the status quo, and moved on with my life. But by continuing to push, By following every lead and pursuing every avenue, we uncovered the full extent of the corruption and ensured it was properly addressed. And finally, I learned that sometimes the smallest issues can reveal the biggest problems. The propane ban seemed petty and minor, just another annoying HOA rule. But it was a symptom of a much deeper dysfunction in how our community was being governed. By refusing to ignore that symptom, by insisting on understanding the reasoning behind the policy, and holding the board accountable when that reasoning proved hypocritical, we were able to diagnose and treat the underlying disease. As I drove home that night, I thought about all the homeowners still dealing with corrupt or dysfunctional HOAs across the country. The legislative reforms in Ohio would help some of them, but many others would still face uphill battles. I made a mental commitment to continue helping where I could, sharing what I had learned and supporting others who chose to stand up against abuse of power. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my townhouse. It was just a building, brick and wood and glass, but it represented something more. It was my home, my investment, and my stake in a community. I had every right to expect that community to be governed fairly and transparently, with my best interests in mind, not used as a personal fiefdom by someone on a power trip. Patricia's 18-month prison sentence was almost over. She would be released soon, returning to society with a criminal record and financial obligations. I wondered what she would do, where she would go. She had sold her townhouse in Riverside Meadows shortly after being sentenced, unable to afford the mortgage and restitution payments simultaneously. I doubted she would stay in the Cleveland area. Too many people knew her story. Part of me felt sympathy for her. She had made terrible choices and was paying a heavy price. But another part of me remembered all the homeowners she had hurt, all the money she had stolen, all the stress and anxiety she had caused with her petty rules and power games. Justice had been served, and while I took no joy in her suffering, I felt satisfied that the system had worked and accountability had been enforced. The next morning, a Sunday, I slept in late and then spent the afternoon doing yard work. Fall was approaching, and leaves were beginning to scatter across my small lawn. As I raked, several neighbors stopped by to chat. Everyone was in good spirits, talking about upcoming community events and sharing updates about their families. This was what Patricia had nearly destroyed with her greed and arrogance. This sense of community, of neighbors caring about each other and enjoying shared spaces. Her vision of the HOA had been authoritarian and self-serving. Our new vision was collaborative and community-focused. The difference was obvious in every interaction, every decision, every policy we implemented. Monday morning, I was back at work when I received a call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, assuming it was a spam call, but something made me pick up. "Hello, is this Oliver Quinn?" A woman's voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Jennifer Martinez. I am a producer for a national news program, and we are doing a segment on HOA corruption and reform. Your name came up repeatedly in our research, and we would love to interview you about your experience." I hesitated. I had done local media interviews, but national television was a different level of exposure. On the other hand, it was another opportunity to raise awareness about these issues and potentially help more people. "What exactly would the segment focus on?" I asked. "We are looking at the power dynamics in HOAs, how easily they can be abused, and what homeowners can do to protect themselves. Your story is compelling because it shows both the problem and the solution. You documented the corruption, worked within the system to expose it, saw criminal prosecution, and then helped pass legislative reform. It is exactly the kind of complete narrative we are looking for. We talked for another 15 minutes, and I agreed to participate. The interview was scheduled for 2 weeks later, to be conducted at my home. They would also interview David Rivera and a few other homeowners who had been involved in the case. When the news crew arrived, they spent hours filming. They shot footage of the community, the clubhouse where Patricia's party had taken place, my patio with the infamous propane grill, and sit-down interviews with multiple people. The producer asked detailed questions about the timeline, the evidence gathering, the legal process, and the emotional impact of the whole experience. What would you say to other homeowners who are dealing with corrupt HOA boards but are afraid to speak up? She asked during my interview. I thought carefully before responding. I would say that your fear is understandable, but silence only empowers those who are abusing their authority. Document everything. Find allies in your community. Learn your rights and the legal remedies available to you. And do not be afraid to escalate when necessary. Most HOA corruption thrives in darkness, when homeowners do not want to rock the boat or think nothing can be done. Shine a light on it, and you will be surprised how quickly things can change. The segment aired 6 weeks later during prime time. I watched it with Marcus and several other neighbors, all of us crowded into my living room. The 12-minute piece was well-produced and comprehensive, covering Patricia's fraud, the criminal case, the legislative reform, and including interviews with several homeowners from other states dealing with similar problems. The response was overwhelming. My email inbox flooded with messages from across the country. The guide we had created about fighting HOA corruption was downloaded thousands of times. State legislators from multiple states reached out to ask about Ohio's reform bill and whether I would be willing to testify in their states as well. I found myself becoming, almost accidentally, a national advocate for HOA reform. It was not something I had planned or even wanted, but it felt important. Too many people were suffering under corrupt or dysfunctional HOA boards, and if my experience could help them, I had an obligation to share it. Over the following year, I testified before legislative committees in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Florida. I consulted with homeowner groups in a dozen other states. I continued to help individual homeowners navigate disputes with their HOAs, offering advice and connecting them with resources. And I remained actively involved with the Riverside Meadows Board, ensuring our community continued to be governed with transparency and integrity. The work was time-consuming and sometimes frustrating, but also deeply rewarding. I received countless messages from people thanking me for helping them stand up to abusive HOA boards. Several told me that without the information and encouragement I provided, they would have given up or simply moved away. Instead, they fought back, exposed corruption in their own communities, and created positive change. Patricia was released from prison after serving 16 months of her 18-month sentence, earning early release for good behavior. I learned this through Detective Morrison, who had stayed in touch. She moved to a rental apartment in Columbus, far from Riverside Meadows, and was working as a cashier at a grocery store while making her restitution payments. By all accounts, she was keeping her head down and trying to rebuild her life quietly. I never reached out to her, and she never contacted me beyond that one letter. Our paths had diverged permanently, connected only by the shared history of those tumultuous months when her corruption was exposed, and she faced the consequences of her actions. 3 years after that first propane ban notice appeared on my door, I stood once again on my back patio on a cold January evening, grilling steaks for dinner. Snow was falling lightly, dusting everything in white, and the propane heater hummed beside me, keeping the space warm. I smiled at the irony. This simple act, grilling outside in winter using propane, had been the catalyst for everything that followed. If Patricia had not banned propane grills, I would never have been so alert to her hypocrisy when she threw that party with propane heaters. If she had not thrown that party, I would never have discovered the financial fraud. If I had not discovered the fraud, she would still be stealing from the community, possibly for years more. And if none of that had happened, I would not have become involved in HOA reform work that was now helping people across the country. One unreasonable policy, one hypocritical action, one homeowner stubborn enough to push back. That was all it took to change everything. I flipped the stakes, watching the flames dance around the meat, and felt profoundly grateful for my stubbornness and for the community that had supported me throughout this unlikely journey. The propane grill that started it all was still working perfectly, still serving its simple purpose, but it had become a symbol of something much larger. The importance of standing up for what is right, even when it seems trivial, even when it seems hopeless, even when everyone tells you to just let it go. Sometimes, the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest changes, and sometimes, all it takes is refusing to put away your grill,